Welcome to Yield Nerd, an educational show about how you can acquire and manage yield. Welcome, Yield Nerds. We are making good headway here. Today, we're going to be talking about municipal bonds, or Munis as they are called. So the idea here is to understand how does that stack with treasuries, agency bonds, and where is it on the risk profile. And let's first learn a little bit about them, why they are there, and we'll go from there. My usual disclaimers: what I'm giving you is not investment advice, it's not tax advice. You make decisions, and I'm not pitching any product, I'm not sponsored by anybody, and I'm not endorsing any product, politics, and so on. So let's go to the background of municipal bonds. What are they and why do they exist? Before we do that, I have a quick pop quiz. Who paid for the Golden Gate Bridge? Any guesses? Well, there is a reason why it is on this episode of Yield Nerd. The Golden Gate Bridge was paid by a whole bunch of people like us and some tax breaks because it was paid through a municipal bond. So let's learn more about what that means. So what is the difference between a state or a municipality and the federal government? Well, a state cannot print money. Then you have to ask the question, then how does a state make money? The most obvious source is sales tax. So anything that is sold in the state generates income as a percentage of the value being sold. There is also property tax, which all of us pay, and whether we like it or not. And there is income tax. Those are the three fundamental drivers. Truth be told, some states also supply power, they are involved in education. There are other sources of income, which is about a small portion, 15-16% of the revenue of an average state. But the top three, by a big distance in terms of source of revenue for a state, are sales tax, property tax, and income tax. So those are the sources of revenue. Then the question is, what makes a good state? So a good state would be one that has good infrastructure. You need to be able to get in and out of that state. Presumably it has an airport that functions well, so you can have more commerce, more shipping, and it has good education and safety. And in terms of municipal bonds, what would also make a state good for municipal bonds would be that there are lots of ways to spend money. Some states may do this through tourism, other states may do it through industry. Presumably there are good communities, so there are good homes. Where there are good homes, there generally are high-paying jobs, and the high-paying jobs generate income taxes. And lastly, the power supply and security and things like that are also in place. So the combination of infrastructure, education, safety, good homes, good communities, all of those make the state what it is. Then the question becomes, if we know the key sources of income for a state, and we know what makes a state a good investable state when it comes to municipal bonds, what are the key expenses of a state? If you want to kind of step back and think about what your answer is, I'll give you the first most important category, which is a little bit of a surprise. Public welfare is the biggest item on the expense line for the state, believe it or not. The next is education, and education is a combination of higher and secondary education and primary education. And these three, public welfare and education, are the biggest sources of expenditure for a state. So the state makes money with sales tax, property tax, income tax. They spend it on public welfare, education, and the rest of the stuff comes far behind it. So then the question is, why does a state need municipal bonds? A state needs municipal bonds, or a municipality needs municipal bonds, so they can raise the funds necessary to make their municipality, their city, their state more desirable and position it for a more prosperous future. And sometimes they are able to do it with existing cash flows. And there are a couple of states in the country that are cash flow positive, believe it or not. And there are other states that need to generate money by issuing bonds. So they don't have surpluses, so they have to borrow. And so municipal bonds are one vehicle for the state or the municipality or the city to borrow. Then the question is, how many kinds of municipal bonds are there? And you can probably slice and dice and create many more subcategories. But in the broadest sense, when a state government or a municipality or a city issues bonds, there are a couple of broad categories of bonds. The first is called a general obligation bond. And we'll talk about what that is in a second. And that statement, general obligation, means the state is effectively telling you, hey, we are the state of XYZ. You know us. You should have full faith that we intend to pay you your par value back, and you should have full faith that we intend to pay you your coupons, and we kind of are credit worthy. We have the right to tax our citizens, and so you should trust us. And that's about it. In a more business world, we would call this an unsecured bond, and there are very specific conditions where this becomes a secured bond, but we're not going to discuss it now. But this is no different than a different entity saying, hey, I'm a nice guy. You can give me money. I don't have the tomato farm to put as collateral, but you know that I can pick the tomatoes anytime I want. They are inside my four walls, so give me money. That is the general obligation. The second is a class of bonds called revenue bonds. And revenue bonds are specific to a project that the state or municipality is trying to get accomplished. So the state may say, we're building the Golden Gate Bridge. We need all of you to give money. When the bridge is completed, we're going to put a toll booth on this side and a toll booth on that side, and we'll pay you back from those revenues. Trust me, we are a good state. You can have full faith that we will complete the Golden Gate Bridge. We will put a toll booth and we will pay you back. That is the concept. Those are called revenue bonds. And it may not just be a bridge, it could be a university, it could be many other things. So you either have the general obligation bonds or the revenue bonds. Then within general obligation bonds, there are still further categories which all go back to how much you as a creditor can sit there and say, okay, I kind of see what I'm getting into. That's really what it's all about. And acronyms aside, there really are three kinds of general obligation bonds. One is called the unlimited tax general obligation bond. The second is the limited tax general obligation bond. And the third is called the general fund general obligation bond. So, what is the unlimited tax? That says, hey, if I am short on the coupon payment, I will increase property taxes or other sources of revenue. They're called ad valorem taxes. I will increase them to whatever I need to pay you back. The limited tax says, within reason, I will increase taxes to pay you, meaning I can't suddenly quadruple property taxes because I owe you something, but I might increase it by 10%, 25%, whatever the amount may be. And the general fund says, I can't make you promises, but we are the state or the municipality, and we can levy taxes on our citizens. So you should count on me. You should have faith in me that I will pay you back. Well, obviously, a state or a municipality cannot suddenly say that we can levy an unlimited amount of property tax. Trust us, we want to buy this bridge. That unlimited tax general obligation does require voter approval. The other two, in general, they do not require voter approval. There are certain conditions where they do. As a citizen of your own municipality or state, you probably want to make sure you have a voice in that. Maybe you don't want that bridge over there anymore if you know that there is an unlimited obligation that your municipality is signing up. Versus in another situation, you may say the benefit of having that infrastructure project or the benefit of having a college in your town may be high enough that you are willing to go for it. So there are these major kinds of general obligations that people have to understand. So, knowing what you know now, what are conclusions you can draw with respect to unlimited, limited, and general fund? You would have to imagine, hey, if I know that the state or the municipality will go all out to increase taxes to whatever it takes to pay me back, I kind of feel good about it. I think I'm going to get paid. That's a logical conclusion. I'm not saying it's the correct one, it's a logical conclusion. Now, in the limited tax side, you may sit there and say, I'm worried that there is a limit. What if the state or the municipality is so deep in a hole that even if they raise taxes to the top end of that limit, they are not able to pay me my par value or my coupon? Turns out, depending on the municipality, depending on the state, depending on the city, if you do your research, you should be able to understand the credit worthiness, and you probably, this is where I would always go back to my statement of both growth investing and yield investing. You need to know what you're getting into. You need to know, hey, what do I think about XYZ county? Do I know that county? You can't just go yield shopping for the highest ticket item and say prayers. Do you know that there is reason to believe a certain investment is a good risk? It has the potential to be stable and make your money back. So those are some of the things you do want to take into account. The general fund does again have a higher risk profile. However, if you know your own locality, and I would challenge you to truly look at a map of your own city, municipality, surrounding counties, you probably know which localities are a much more stable area in terms of the tax base, in terms of the residential areas, in terms of jobs, and which ones are not. And you can sit there and say, if I know that there is a bond being issued in a certain area, and maybe you used to live in a different state and you have information about that state. So you should first understand what your duration is. You should then say, if my duration is 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 7 years, whatever it may be, do I have reason to believe that this particular project issued by that particular municipality or state is something I can put my chips behind? Now, there are institutions that give credit ratings, and you can absolutely consult those credit ratings, but I would encourage you to also use your own instinct and your own knowledge and your own experience, and that is always something you should do. So now is a question that I'd like for you to ask. Mr. Johnny here, he bought a bond to support building the Golden Gate Bridge. Remember, it was a municipal bond. Johnny feels really good about it. He supported it, and he's waiting for his coupon payment, and he loves admiring it. And turns out the city missed a coupon payment. And so Johnny said, "Hey, I paid for a bridge, for whatever portion of the bridge, so I'm going to put a tent up under that bridge because I'm a rightful owner. They haven't paid me. I'm just going to start claiming my part of that bridge." I give that ridiculous example to make a point. Yes, the entity issuing the bond has an obligation to pay your coupon and return your par value. However, if that event does not happen, you don't just get to go in and claim a portion of that. There is a process for it. In other words, municipalities do have defaults. They don't call it a true bankruptcy in the sense of a corporation. It's more called a default. There are municipalities that have declared bankruptcy, and we'll look at some of that detail a little more. But just understand that you don't own the state, you don't own the local college, no matter what happens to that bond. So let's look at some examples of muni bankruptcies so you understand what you're getting into. The very fact that we are talking about bankruptcies and things like that should tell you we are moving higher up the risk curve. We're no longer talking about the United States Treasury that can just print money to dig its way out of debt. We're not talking about the federal agencies that actually don't own the mortgage, but they ship the money to the banks that lend and therefore again have very little or no risk. And the FHLB, the FCB, they are backed by the United States government. We're talking about local municipalities, states. They do have the authority to tax their citizens, but there needs to be a taxable base there for them to service your debt. Detroit, Michigan is a landmark case, one of the largest bankruptcies that happened. People holding bonds in the municipality of Detroit made 34 cents on the dollar. Some of them only made 10 cents on the dollar. Here is another classic one, Jefferson County, Alabama. Bondholders made roughly 53 cents on the dollar. The moral of the story is munis do default. However, the default rate is a very, very small fraction. In general, you get your par value back and you indeed get your coupons. Because the default rate is very, very low, and oh, by the way, we haven't talked about tax advantages yet. Their reward profile or yield profile is also different. So let's learn more about that. So how do you make a logical conclusion? You've looked at all the information. What do you need to do to make a wise decision? I would say look at a muni like you're looking at an equity or buying a stock or buying a company. You're going to sit there and say, what are the future cash flows of that municipality? Is that locality something that is going to prosper? Is that state, that does that state have natural resources or tourism revenue or industry or government projects, public works? What is the source of revenue for that state? What are the geographical trends? If your duration is 5 years, 7 years versus 30 years, you may want to think differently. So you look at your duration, you look at the state, you look at the municipality, and you're going to say, hey, do I know enough about this matter? What are other experts saying that, about that particular municipality or state? And these things get credit ratings as well, and you can read their reports and the rationale for why they get the credit rating they do. Ultimately, I would encourage you to do your own homework. Do you have reason to trust? Did you live in that municipality? Do you have reason to believe? And what is your duration? If you want to hold things for 7 years, but you end up buying a bond with a 30-year maturity, it is not consistent with how you think. So be very careful. Think and act in a consistent manner, and that will always help you. One more thing. At the end of the day, any instrument, if the reward is worth the risk, it's something you may want to do. So if the municipality says, hey, I know this is a general fund, general obligation bond, but we're going to give you a return that you will be very happy with, and your duration is something you're happy with, maybe you will do that. So all of this is a lot of ifs and buts and hypotheticals. So let's try to put that around a framework and get there. We are getting ready to leave the definition of what a municipal bond is and go into the yield curve. So I'm going to stop right here. And in the next part of this episode, we're going to dive deeper into the yield curve itself, look at what the muni bonds are, what kind of tax advantages do you really get, what is the after-tax keep that you have, and then we'll buy a muni bond at the end of the show. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Yield Nerd, a do-it-yourself show for yield accumulation and management.